My brother called Tuesday morning. Dad says Thanksgiving isn't a place for losers this year, Camille. He doesn't want your negativity bringing down the family celebration. I set down my coffee and looked out at the Portland skyline from my corner office. That's interesting, Nathan. Did he mention that the loser owns the building his restaurant operates in? Let us know in the comments where you're watching. If this resonated, don't miss out on subscribing because tomorrow I'm sharing something that will completely change how you think about this topic. The silence that followed would have been amusing if it weren't so revealing about how completely my family had misunderstood the trajectory of my life over the past 8 years. Nathan's uncomfortable clearing of his throat echoed through my phone while I watched morning commuters navigate the bustling streets 32 floors below, each one probably earning more respect from their families than I had ever received from mine. My father, Robert Kellerman, had built his identity around being the successful patriarch of our family. His restaurant, Kellerman's Kitchen, represented everything he valued: traditional values, hard work paying off, and the kind of blue-collar success story that made him feel superior to anyone he perceived as failing to meet his standards. The irony never escaped me that his definition of success had become so narrow that it excluded his own daughter's achievements while celebrating mediocrity in his sons. For 8 years, I had been building Cascade Holdings from a small property investment firm into one of the Pacific Northwest's most influential real estate development companies. My portfolio included commercial properties, residential developments, and hospitality ventures across Oregon and Washington that generated revenue streams my father couldn't comprehend, even if someone explained them with visual aids and simple language. Yet somehow, in Robert Kellerman's understanding of family dynamics, I remained the daughter who had disappointed him by choosing career ambitions over marriage and children. The daughter whose divorce 3 years ago had somehow reflected poorly on his parenting rather than representing my escape from a relationship that had stifled my professional growth. The daughter whose success he dismissed because it didn't fit his traditional expectations of feminine achievement. My brother had always served as the family messenger, delivering Dad's judgments with just enough personal distance to avoid taking responsibility for their cruelty while maintaining his position as the favorite son. At 35, he worked as a middle manager at a logistics company, earning a respectable but unremarkable salary that allowed him to buy Dad's approval through consistent mediocrity and unwavering agreement with whatever opinions Robert expressed. My younger brother, Tyler, occupied a different role in the family hierarchy. As the baby, at 28, he had perfected the art of charming his way through life while avoiding any serious responsibilities or commitments. His part-time work at a local gym and his revolving door of girlfriend relationships somehow earned him more family respect than my 8-figure business empire, primarily because his lifestyle choices didn't challenge Dad's assumptions about how success should look. The 3 men in my family had developed an unspoken agreement over the years. Camille's business activities were too complicated to understand, probably not as successful as she claimed, and definitely not as important as the real work that men did in traditional industries. This willful ignorance allowed them to maintain their comfortable assumptions about family hierarchy while dismissing achievements that would have earned respect and admiration in any other context. Kellerman's Kitchen occupied a prime location in southeast Portland's trendy Hawthorne district, surrounded by boutique shops, craft breweries, and the kind of upscale dining establishments that attracted both locals and tourists seeking authentic Portland experiences. Dad had secured the lease 8 years ago when the neighborhood was transitioning from working-class residential to hip commercial destination, and he never tired of telling anyone who would listen about his brilliant timing and business instincts. The restaurant specialized in comfort food with Pacific Northwest influences, pot rest with local mushrooms, fish and chips using Oregon coast catches, and desserts featuring seasonal berries from Willamette Valley farms. Dad's menu reflected his personality, traditional foundations with just enough local flair to seem current, without challenging anyone's expectations or requiring too much adaptation to changing tastes. Robert Kellerman moved through his restaurant with the confident authority of a man who believed his success validated every opinion he had ever held about life, family, and the proper order of things. His interactions with staff, customers, and suppliers reflected someone who had found his element and intended to defend it against any challenges or changes that might threaten his comfortable understanding of how the world worked. The restaurant's success had indeed been impressive for a small family business. Steady customer base, positive reviews, and enough profit to support Dad's lifestyle while employing 12 people in jobs that paid decent wages with health benefits. By any reasonable standard, Kellerman's Kitchen represented the kind of entrepreneurial achievement that deserved recognition and respect from family members. But Robert's success had also created blind spots that prevented him from recognizing or appreciating different types of achievement, particularly when those achievements challenged his assumptions about gender roles, business hierarchies, and the proper sources of family pride. His restaurant had become both his greatest accomplishment and the lens through which he viewed everyone else's efforts, usually finding them lacking in the authenticity and straightforward value creation that he associated with real work. The Thanksgiving exclusion represented the culmination of years of subtle dismissal and growing resentment that had been building as my business success became increasingly difficult to ignore or minimize. Dad's comfort with his role as family patriarch had been gradually eroded by a daughter whose achievements dwarfed his own, even though he lacked the knowledge or perspective to understand the true scope of what I had built. Nathan's phone call served as the delivery mechanism for a message that Robert couldn't deliver directly. The family celebration would proceed without the member whose success had become an uncomfortable reminder that his definitions of achievement and family value might require updating. The exclusion was presented as protecting family harmony, but it actually represented protecting Dad's ego from confronting realities he preferred to ignore. My office walls displayed awards from the Portland Business Journal, certificates from the Oregon Real Estate Development Association, and photographs from groundbreaking ceremonies for projects that had reshaped entire neighborhoods. The mahogany desk where I sat during Nathan's call had been crafted from reclaimed wood salvaged from a historic Portland building I had renovated into luxury condominiums that sold for prices exceeding Dad's annual restaurant revenue. Yet somehow, in my family's understanding of success and worth, the woman who controlled millions of dollars in regional real estate development remained the disappointment who deserved exclusion from holiday celebrations. The daughter whose business decisions affected thousands of jobs and shaped entire communities was deemed too negative and unsuccessful to share turkey and stuffing with relatives whose accomplishments paled beside her own. The morning light streaming through my office windows illuminated financial reports documenting Cascade Holdings' expansion into new markets, acquisition proposals for properties across 3 states, and development plans that would create hundreds of housing units for Portland's growing population. These documents represented the kind of strategic thinking and execution that built lasting wealth and community impact. Yet they remained invisible to family members who measured success through restaurant covers served and employee paychecks issued. Before I could respond to Nathan's Thanksgiving announcement, my assistant's voice came through the intercom with a reminder that would prove more significant than either of us realized at that moment. Mrs. Kellerman, I have the final lease documents for the Hawthorne District property ready for your signature. If you're loving what you're hearing, smash that subscribe button. It really keeps us going. All right, let's jump back in. Nathan's uncomfortable silence stretched long enough for me to process the full weight of what he had just delivered. 8 years of building Cascade Holdings into a regional powerhouse. 8 years of quietly supporting my family's various financial needs through anonymous gifts and strategic business decisions. 8 years of accepting their dismissive treatment while funding their comfortable lifestyles. All of it had culminated in this moment, exclusion from our family's most important gathering because my father had decided I was a loser whose presence would somehow contaminate their celebration? Nathan, I need to understand something, I said, my voice carrying the professional composure that had served me through hostile board meetings and complex negotiations. Was this Dad's unilateral decision, or did you and Tyler participate in planning my exclusion from Thanksgiving? The pause that followed was longer and more telling than any confession could have been. Nathan was choosing his words carefully, which meant this conversation had been rehearsed, discussed, and coordinated among the men in my family like a business decision requiring unanimous approval. Look, Camille, we all talked about it, Nathan finally admitted, his tone carrying the defensive edge he always employed when forced to acknowledge his participation in something he knew was wrong. Dad's been really stressed about the restaurant lately, and he feels like family gatherings have become too tense when you're there. You know how you get when we're all together. The victim blaming began immediately, as it always did when my family's behavior crossed ethical lines they couldn't justify through direct explanation. My presence had become tense, rather than acknowledging their dismissive treatment created the tension. My reactions to years of subtle insults and minimization were characterized as personality flaws, rather than natural responses to disrespectful behavior. How do I get Nathan? I asked, genuinely curious about what narrative they had constructed to rationalize excluding someone whose anonymous generosity had supported their various endeavors for nearly a decade. You know, with all the business talk and correcting Dad when he explains things about running a restaurant, Tyler mentioned how you made him feel stupid at Easter when he was talking about his training certifications, and Dad thinks you use your success to make the rest of us feel inadequate. The rewriting of history was breathtaking in its audacity. My attempts to contribute to family conversations had been transformed into condescending lectures. My professional expertise, offered quietly when asked for advice, had become weapons used to belittle relatives whose accomplishments deserved equal respect. My financial success, achieved through dedication and strategic thinking they had never bothered to understand, was now evidence of arrogance that justified my exclusion from family celebrations. Tyler felt stupid when I acknowledged his fitness certifications and asked thoughtful questions about his training programs. I asked, remembering Easter dinner where I had genuinely tried to show interest in my youngest brother's work, despite his tendency to treat conversations like monologues that required audience appreciation rather than genuine exchange.
It's not what you said, it's how you said it. Like you were humoring him instead of really caring about his achievements. Dad noticed how you checked your phone during his stories about the restaurant's busy season. And frankly, Camille, it felt disrespectful to everyone there. The transformation of my professional obligations into personal slights revealed how completely my family had misunderstood both my work demands and my attempts to balance family time with business responsibilities that actually funded their comfortable lifestyles. Phone calls I had taken during holiday gatherings involved decisions affecting hundreds of employees and millions of dollars in development projects, yet my family interpreted this as evidence that I considered them less important than my hobby business. So the solution to perceived family tension was to exclude me entirely while maintaining the Thanksgiving celebration at Dad's restaurant, which operates in a building I own? I asked, allowing just enough edge into my voice to signal that this conversation was approaching territory Nathan had never anticipated navigating. What does that have to do with anything? Nathan's confusion was genuine and revealing. He truly had no understanding of the business relationships that connected his family's comfort to my professional success. Dad's lease arrangement with the building owner is completely separate from family issues. The innocent ignorance would have been charming if it weren't so strategically convenient. My family had spent years benefiting from my success while maintaining plausible deniability about the sources of those benefits. Nathan genuinely believed that Dad's favorable lease terms, Tyler's mysteriously approved gym membership loans, and the various financial emergencies that had been resolved through anonymous assistance represented coincidental good fortune rather than deliberate family support. Nathan, I want you to listen to me very carefully, I said, walking to my office windows where the afternoon light illuminated downtown Portland's skyline. Who do you think owns the building where Kellerman's kitchen operates? Some property management company, I guess. Dad handles all that business stuff himself. Why does it matter who his landlord is? The genuine confusion in Nathan's voice confirmed what I had suspected for years. My family had never bothered to investigate or understand the business infrastructure that supported their comfortable existence. Dad's brilliant timing in securing prime restaurant space, Tyler's mysteriously approved gym membership loans, and the various financial emergencies that had been resolved through anonymous assistance, none of them had ever wondered about the mechanisms that kept their lives running smoothly while mine remained invisible to them. I want you to call Dad and tell him that his building owner would like to discuss the Thanksgiving exclusion decision with him directly, I said, ending the call before Nathan could respond with additional justifications or family damage control. The silence of my office felt different now, charged with the recognition that years of quiet accommodation had reached their natural endpoint. My family had made a collective decision about my worth and place in their hierarchy, and that decision revealed everything I needed to understand about relationships I had been trying to preserve through patience and generosity. My assistant entered with the lease documents I had been reviewing when Nathan's call interrupted my morning. The Hawthorne District property file contained 8 years of rent payments, lease renewals, and building maintenance records that told the story of how Kellerman's kitchen had thrived in a location that should have been financially challenging for a small family restaurant. The market rate rent for Dad's prime corner location should have been $18,000 monthly based on comparable properties in the trendy district. Instead, his lease showed monthly payments of $6,500, locked in for 5 years with options for renewal at the same rate. The building's property taxes, maintenance costs, and infrastructure improvements had been absorbed by the owner, creating an operating environment that allowed Dad's restaurant to flourish without the financial pressure that destroyed most small hospitality businesses within their first 3 years. Every lease renewal had been handled through property management intermediaries who ensured that Robert Kellerman never learned the identity of his remarkably generous landlord. His success story, the foundation of his pride and authority within our family structure, existed only because the daughter he was excluding from Thanksgiving had quietly subsidized his dream for nearly a decade. The irony was perfect and devastating. Dad's restaurant success, which had become the measuring stick he used to evaluate everyone else's achievements, was built on financial support from the family member he had just deemed too unsuccessful to deserve inclusion in holiday celebrations. His comfortable position as family patriarch earned through business acumen he celebrated publicly depended entirely on anonymous generosity from the daughter whose own business success he dismissed as insignificant. My phone rang within 20 minutes, displaying Dad's number with the urgency I had expected once Nathan delivered my message about building ownership discussions. Robert Kellerman's voice carried the careful modulation of someone who had suddenly realized he might be operating with incomplete information about power dynamics he thought he understood completely. Camille, Nathan mentioned you wanted to discuss something about the building lease. I'm not sure kind of conversation you think we need to have, but my business arrangements are separate from family matters. The attempt to maintain separation between his professional success and family relationships revealed how desperately Dad needed to preserve the narrative that had sustained his authority for 8 years. Acknowledging any connection between his restaurant's favorable terms and his family relationships would require admitting that his success story had been edited to remove crucial chapters about assistance he had never recognized or appreciated.
Dad, I think we need to have a very direct conversation about your Thanksgiving guest list and the business relationships that make your celebration possible, I replied, letting the weight of unspoken implications settle between us.
The silence that followed would be the last moment of Robert Kellerman's comfortable ignorance about who actually held power in our family's complex web of relationships, dependencies, and carefully maintained illusions. Dad's call came 40 minutes later, his voice carrying the strained formality of someone who had spent the intervening time attempting to research property ownership records and coming face to face with information that challenged everything he thought he knew about his business success. The public records search had apparently yielded enough breadcrumbs to make him deeply uncomfortable, though not enough to reveal the full scope of how thoroughly his restaurant's prosperity depended on decisions made in my corner office. Camille, I've been looking into some property records, and I think there might be some kind of misunderstanding about building ownership in my area, Dad began, his tone carrying the careful neutrality of someone navigating potentially explosive territory. I found some corporate names that don't match what I expected, and I wanted to clarify things before any confusion affects family relationships. The diplomatic language revealed how completely Dad's worldview had shifted in less than an hour. The man who had confidently excluded his daughter for Thanksgiving for being a loser was now speaking with the careful deference typically reserved for people whose decisions could fundamentally alter his business operations. His research had clearly uncovered enough connections to make him question assumptions he had maintained for 8 years. "What kind of corporate names did you find, Dad?" I asked, settling back in my leather chair while reviewing the comprehensive file my assistant had prepared containing every business transaction that had touched my family's lives over the past decade. The documentation was extensive and revealing in ways that would transform several more conversations before this day ended. "Cascade Holdings is my company, Dad. I've owned your building for the past 8 years, along with most of the commercial real estate in your district. Your lease terms, your operating costs, and your business environment have been structured to ensure Kellerman's Kitchen could thrive without the financial pressures that typically destroy family restaurants within their first 3 years." The silence that followed was profound and painful. I could hear Dad's breathing change as he processed information that recontextualized every conversation we had shared about business success, family contributions, and the relative value of our respective achievements. The foundation of his identity as successful family patriarch was crumbling in real time as he understood that his restaurant's prosperity existed only because of strategic decisions made by the daughter he had just excluded from family celebrations. "You've been my landlord for 8 years?" His voice cracked slightly with the question, carrying disbelief mixed with growing recognition of how thoroughly he had misunderstood the business relationships that supported his comfortable existence. "Not directly. Property management companies handle day-to-day operations to maintain your privacy and allow you to focus on running your restaurant. But yes, every lease renewal, every building improvement, every decision about rent increases or operating cost adjustments has crossed my desk for final approval. I've ensured that Kellerman's Kitchen operates under the most favorable terms possible because I wanted Dad to succeed in pursuing his dream." The confession felt both liberating and devastating. 8 years of anonymous support, delivered through corporate structures that preserve Dad's dignity while subsidizing his success, had been my way of showing love and respect for a man whose approval I had never been able to earn through direct achievement. The financial assistance had been my substitute for the emotional connection that seemed impossible given our fundamental differences about what constituted meaningful accomplishment. "Camille, I had no idea. If I'd known—" Dad's voice trailed off as he grappled with implications that extended far beyond simple business relationships. "How much money have you spent supporting the restaurant?" The question opened a door I had never intended to walk through, but circumstances had made privacy impossible and truth unavoidable. Your current lease should cost $18,500 monthly based on market rates for prime Hawthorne District locations. You've been paying $6,500 for 8 years. That's approximately $960,000 in rent subsidies alone, not including property tax absorption, building maintenance, infrastructure upgrades, and below-market utility arrangements. Dad's sharp intake of breath was audible through the phone. Nearly $1 million in hidden support had flowed from my business operations to his restaurant's success, creating the financial foundation that allowed him to build his reputation as a savvy businessman who had perfectly timed the neighborhood's commercial development. His success story, the achievement he celebrated most proudly, was actually a testament to my strategic thinking and financial generosity.
I never asked for any of that assistance, Dad said quietly, though his tone carried shame rather than indignation. I thought I had earned everything through my own hard work and business instincts. You did earn it, Dad. Your food is excellent, your customer service is outstanding, and you've built genuine community connections that create the kind of loyal customer base most restaurants never achieve. The financial assistance simply ensured that your efforts could succeed without being crushed by market pressures that destroy talented people who lack sufficient capital or favorable operating terms. My attempt to preserve his dignity while acknowledging the truth created space for Dad to process information without feeling completely diminished by revelations that challenged his understanding of his own competence. The man who had excluded me from Thanksgiving was learning that his business success depended entirely on the daughter he had characterized as a failure whose presence would contaminate family celebrations. But there's more you need to understand, I continued, knowing that complete honesty was now unavoidable. Nathan's mortgage approval 3 years ago required a cosigner with substantial assets and excellent credit. Tyler's various loan applications and financial emergencies have been resolved through strategic interventions that prevented credit damage and legal complications. Your comfortable family lifestyle exists because I've spent 8 years quietly managing financial challenges before they became visible problems. The systematic nature of my family support was more extensive than even I had fully recognized until reviewing the comprehensive documentation my assistant had compiled. Every family member had benefited from my professional success and strategic thinking, yet none of them had ever wondered about the mechanisms that kept their lives running smoothly, while mine remained invisible to them. Nathan never mentioned needing a cosigner, Dad said, his voice carrying growing recognition of how many family narratives required revision in light of new information. He said his mortgage application was approved based on his employment history and debt-to-income ratios. Nathan believes that because preserving family dignity was more important to me than receiving credit for assistance that should have remained private. But when family members decide that my contributions aren't valuable enough to merit inclusion in holiday celebrations, privacy becomes secondary to ensuring everyone understands the actual dynamics of our relationships. My phone buzzed with an incoming call from Tyler, whose name appeared on the screen with timing that suggested Nathan had been busy spreading word about property ownership revelations and their implications for family dynamics. The younger brother, who had felt stupid during Easter conversations about his fitness certifications, was apparently ready to discuss business relationships he had never bothered to investigate or appreciate. Dad, Tyler's calling. I suspect he's just learned some interesting information about his financial history and wants to discuss how his various emergencies were resolved without long-term consequences for his credit rating or legal standing. Camille, before you take that call, I need to ask you something directly, Dad said, his voice carrying the weight of a man who was finally understanding the magnitude of what he had risked through his Thanksgiving exclusion decision. Are you going to use this financial leverage to punish us for the holiday arrangement? Because if you are, I need to understand what we're facing and how to protect the restaurant and my employees. The question revealed both fear and character growth. Dad was finally grasping that his business success depended entirely on my goodwill, while simultaneously demonstrating concern for people whose livelihoods could be affected by family conflicts they had no part in creating. His recognition that 12 restaurant employees deserved protection from consequences of his personal decisions showed moral development that had been hidden beneath years of stubborn pride and narrow thinking. I'm going to answer Tyler's call, and then I think we need to have a family meeting tonight to discuss how Thanksgiving arrangements should be reconsidered in light of new information about our financial relationships. I allowed the implications to settle without making explicit threats that might escalate tensions unnecessarily. All of us understand that actions have consequences, Dad. The question now is whether our family is capable of learning from those consequences and making better decisions going forward. The call with Tyler would prove even more revealing about how completely my family had misunderstood the business infrastructure that supported their comfortable existence, while setting up the confrontation that would finally force everyone to acknowledge realities they had spent years avoiding through willful ignorance and convenient assumptions about who deserved credit for what accomplishments. Tyler's call lasted exactly 7 minutes, during which my youngest brother transformed from confused panic to desperate bargaining as I methodically explained how his various financial crises had been resolved through strategic interventions he had never bothered to investigate or appreciate. His gym business loan, his credit card debt consolidation, his mysteriously dismissed parking tickets and minor legal issues. Every problem that had threatened his comfortable lifestyle had disappeared through mechanisms he had attributed to good luck rather than family assistance. Camille, I swear I had no idea any of that stuff was connected to you, Tyler said, his voice carrying genuine distress mixed with growing recognition of how precarious his financial situation would become without continued anonymous support. When Nathan told me about the building thing, I started thinking about how many times problems just seem to work themselves out, and I got worried that maybe the sister you helped exclude from Thanksgiving for being a loser might not appreciate having her contributions dismissed while her generosity was taken for granted. I finished, allowing the full weight of his situation to settle between us. The family meeting convened at 7 o'clock in the private dining room at Kellerman's kitchen, a location I had chosen deliberately for its symbolic significance. The 3 men who had conspired to exclude me from holiday celebrations now sat in chairs arranged around a table located in a building I owned, surrounded by restaurant success that existed only because of my strategic financial support. Dad had closed the restaurant early, sending his 12 employees home with full pay while keeping the lights dim enough to create the intimate atmosphere typically reserved for difficult family conversations that required privacy and careful emotional management. The empty dining room beyond our private space felt like a stage set waiting for a performance that would reshape every relationship present. Nathan arrived first, carrying a manila folder containing documents he had apparently printed after conducting his own research into Cascade Holdings' Portland real estate portfolio. His face showed the strained expression of someone who had spent the afternoon discovering that his sister controlled significantly more of their family's financial infrastructure than anyone had ever suspected or acknowledged. Tyler entered minutes later with his girlfriend Diana, whose presence initially surprised me until I realized he probably needed emotional support for a conversation that threatened to destabilize everything he thought he understood about his own financial security. Diana's curious glances around the restaurant suggested Tyler had briefed her about family revelations without providing enough context for her to understand the magnitude of what was unfolding. Dad emerged from the kitchen carrying a bottle of wine and wearing the careful expression of someone preparing to navigate territory he had never expected to encounter in his own restaurant. His movements showed the deliberate precision of a man who understood that every word and gesture in the coming conversation would carry consequences extending beyond typical family disagreements. "Before we begin," I said, placing my own folder on the cable while maintaining the professional composure that had served me through countless high-stakes negotiations, "I want everyone to understand that this meeting will involve complete transparency about financial relationships that have been maintained privately for 8 years. Once certain information is shared, our family dynamics will never return to their previous state."
The warning created immediate tension, though each family member's reaction revealed different levels of understanding about what they were about to learn. Dad's resigned nod suggested he had spent the afternoon calculating potential consequences and preparing himself for complete revelation. Nathan's nervous paper shuffling indicated his research had uncovered only the beginning of a much larger story. Tyler's quick glance at Diana revealed someone seeking reassurance for a situation he didn't fully comprehend. "Nathan, why don't you start by sharing what you discovered during your property research this afternoon?" I suggested, knowing that having him present his findings would create a foundation for revelations that would prove far more extensive than anything he had uncovered independently. "Well, I found out that Cascade Holdings owns most of the commercial properties in Dad's district, plus a bunch of residential developments around Portland. The corporate structure is pretty complex, with subsidiary companies handling different types of properties and services." His summary was accurate but incomplete, focusing on publicly available information while missing the strategic decisions and financial engineering that had created favorable operating conditions for every family member present. Nathan had discovered the framework without understanding the systematic support that framework had delivered to people who had never bothered to investigate the mechanisms that kept their lives running smoothly. "What else did you find?" I asked, encouraging him to continue, while preparing to fill in gaps that would transform his surface-level research into a comprehensive understanding of how thoroughly his family depended on my professional success. "There are connections to financial services companies, property management firms, and what looks like some kind of loan servicing operation. I couldn't figure out all the relationships, but it seems like Cascade Holdings is involved in a lot more than just owning buildings." Tyler interrupted with the blunt question that had apparently been troubling him since our phone conversation ended. "Camille, exactly how much money have you spent on family stuff over the years? Because I'm starting to think that maybe I owe you more than just an apology about Thanksgiving." The directness was refreshing after years of diplomatic dancing around topics that everyone suspected but no one had ever been willing to address openly. Tyler's willingness to confront uncomfortable truths suggested character development that hadn't been evident during holiday gatherings where he typically focused on entertainment rather than serious conversation. Tyler's gym business loan required a guarantor with substantial assets when traditional financing fell through. I began, opening my folder to reveal comprehensive documentation that would answer his question with mathematical precision. "The property management company that resolved your parking ticket issues and minor legal complications operates as a subsidiary of Cascade Holdings. Your credit card debt consolidation was arranged through financial services partnerships that prevented long-term damage to your credit rating."
Diana's sharp intake of breath suggested she was beginning to understand that her boyfriend's comfortable lifestyle had been subsidized by family support he had never recognized or acknowledged. Her wide-eyed expression revealed someone witnessing revelations that recontextualized everything Tyler had told her about his independent financial management and natural problem-solving abilities. Nathan's mortgage application required intervention when his debt-to-income ratios fell below lending standards, I continued, turning to address my middle brother, whose research had apparently not extended to examining his own financial history. The cosigner arrangements were structured to preserve your dignity while ensuring approval for the home purchase you wanted to make. Nathan's face paled as he realized that his homeownership, the achievement he celebrated as evidence of his successful transition to adult responsibility, existed only because of assistance he had never requested or acknowledged. The pride he felt in making monthly mortgage payments was based on financial arrangements that would never have existed without my strategic intervention. Dad's restaurant lease terms represent approximately $12,000 monthly in market rate savings, totaling $960,000 over 8 years, I said, presenting the documentation that revealed the full scope of support that had enabled Kellerman's Kitchen to thrive in a location that should have been financially challenging for a family business. Building maintenance, property tax absorption, and utility arrangements have provided additional savings that exceed $200,000 in the same period. The silence that followed was profound and transformative. 3 grown men sat staring at documents that proved their comfortable lifestyles, successful achievements, and financial security existed only because of systematic support from the family member they had just excluded from holiday celebrations for being a loser whose presence would contaminate their gathering. The total financial support provided to this family over 8 years exceeds $1.4 million, I concluded, allowing the number to resonate in a room where the collective annual income of everyone present barely reached half that amount. Every family gathering you've excluded me from was made possible by anonymous generosity you never bothered to investigate or acknowledge. Dad was the first to find his voice, though his words carried the hollow weight of someone whose entire understanding of his own competence had been fundamentally altered. Camille, I don't know what to say. I built my identity around the restaurant's success, and now I discover that success was only possible because of support I never recognized. Your food is excellent, your customer service is outstanding, and you've created genuine community connections that most restaurants never achieve, I replied, maintaining respect for his actual accomplishments while acknowledging the financial foundation that had made them possible. The support I provided ensured that your talents could flourish without being destroyed by market pressures that crush competent people who lack sufficient capital. Tyler spoke next, his voice cracking with emotion that suggested genuine remorse rather than strategic damage control. I feel like such an idiot. All these years, I thought I was managing my own life, making my own way, and it turns out I've been completely dependent on help I never even recognized. The question now, I said, standing to address my family with the authority that my revelations had finally made visible to them, is whether you're capable of learning from this experience and making different choices about how we treat each other going forward. Nathan looked up from the documents with desperate hope mixed with growing understanding that his sister now held complete power over family relationships and financial arrangements that had been taken for granted for nearly a decade. What do we need to do to fix this situation, Camille? What would it take for you to consider joining us for Thanksgiving? The moment of truth had arrived when years of patient accommodation and anonymous support would either transform into mutual respect and genuine family connection, or reveal that some people remained incapable of growth, even when confronted with overwhelming evidence of their own dependence and ingratitude. The weight of Nathan's question hung in the air between us, carrying 8 years of accumulated misunderstandings and the desperate hope that family relationships built on false assumptions could somehow be reconstructed on foundations of truth and mutual respect. His willingness to ask what needed to be done represented the first genuine acknowledgement that our family dynamics had been fundamentally flawed and required intentional restructuring rather than simple apologies. The question isn't what you need to do to fix this, Nathan. The question is whether you're capable of understanding that family relationships require the same respect, recognition, and reciprocity that successful business partnerships demand. Dad leaned forward in his chair, his hands clasped together with the intensity of someone finally grasping that his role as family patriarch had been based on incomplete information about the actual distribution of resources and influence among his children. Camille, I want to understand what that means in practical terms. How do we move forward from here? His question revealed both humility and genuine confusion about how to navigate relationships where traditional hierarchies had been completely inverted by revelations that transformed his successful daughter into the family's primary economic engine and strategic decision-maker. Robert Kellerman was discovering that effective leadership required adapting to new information rather than defending outdated assumptions.
It means that family decisions affecting any of us should be made through consultation and mutual agreement, not unilateral declarations delivered through intermediaries, I replied, looking directly at each of my brothers while speaking. It means that my professional achievements deserve the same recognition and respect that Dad's restaurant success has always received. It means that my presence at family gatherings should be valued rather than treated as a problem requiring management. Tyler shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his girlfriend Deanna squeezing his hand with the supportive gesture of someone witnessing her partner confront uncomfortable truths about his own character and behavior. Camille, I think we all understand now that we've been treating you terribly while depending on your help. But how do we prove that we've learned from this? What would convince you that things would be different going forward? His question demonstrated emotional maturity that hadn't been evident during previous family interactions, where he typically focused on entertainment and social dynamics, rather than serious conversation about relationships and responsibilities. Tyler was finally engaging with the kind of substantive discussion that family bonds required to develop beyond superficial pleasantries. "I want to see concrete changes in how our family operates," I said, opening a notebook where I had outlined specific requirements during the afternoon's reflection on what genuine family reconciliation would require. First, financial transparency. Everyone needs to understand the business relationships that connect our family's comfort to my professional success. No more anonymous support that allows people to maintain illusions about their own financial independence. The requirement would eliminate the comfortable ignorance that had allowed my family to benefit from my success while dismissing my contributions as insignificant hobby activities. Nathan's mortgage, Tyler's various financial rescues, and Dad's restaurant subsidies would become acknowledged family history rather than convenient coincidences that required no gratitude or recognition. Second, professional respect. My business expertise and strategic thinking deserve consultation when family members face financial decisions or opportunities. No more dismissing my advice while secretly depending on my interventions to solve problems you create through poor planning or impulsive choices. This condition addressed years of frustration with family members who had treated my professional knowledge as a relevant opinion, while depending on that same expertise to resolve crises they had created through financial mismanagement or inadequate strategic thinking. Third, equal participation in family decision-making. Holiday arrangements, family celebrations, and major choices affecting multiple family members require input from everyone involved, including the person whose resources often make those celebrations possible. The Thanksgiving exclusion had crystallized a pattern of decision-making that treated my participation as optional, while considering my financial contribution essential. Future family dynamics would need to reflect actual rather than assumed power relationships and mutual dependencies. Nathan nodded slowly, his expression showing genuine acceptance rather than strategic agreement designed to minimize immediate consequences. "Those requirements make complete sense, Camille. I think we all understand now that our family relationships have been built on assumptions that weren't fair to you or realistic about how much we depend on your success." Dad spoke with the careful, measured tone of someone choosing words that would either begin rebuilding trust or confirm that his character growth remained limited, despite overwhelming evidence of his need for personal development. "I want to publicly acknowledge what I learned tonight, not just to you, but to our extended family and friends. People need to understand that my restaurant's success was made possible by my daughter's business expertise and financial support." His offer represented a significant sacrifice of pride and public recognition that had sustained his identity for 8 years. Robert Kellerman was proposing to share credit for achievements he had previously claimed as evidence of his own business acumen and strategic timing, acknowledging dependence he had never wanted to admit. "I also want to restructure the restaurant's lease arrangement to reflect market rates. If Cascade Holdings is going to continue owning the building, I want to pay fair rent and earn my success through actual business performance rather than family subsidies." The proposal demonstrated both integrity and financial courage that would test whether Cascade Kitchen could sustain profitability without the anonymous support that had created favorable operating conditions for 8 years. Dad was choosing to risk his business success in order to rebuild his relationship with me on foundations of mutual respect rather than secret dependency. Tyler looked at his girlfriend before speaking, seeking approval for commitments that would affect their relationship and his financial future. "I want to understand my actual financial situation and start taking responsibility for my own decisions. No more mystery problem solving or anonymous help. If I need assistance, I'll ask directly and acknowledge what I receive."
His willingness to embrace financial vulnerability while accepting accountability for past mistakes represented genuine character development that transformed him from someone who avoided serious responsibilities into a family member capable of honest self-assessment and growth. Deanna and I have been talking about getting more serious, and I realize now that I can't build an adult relationship while depending on family support I don't even recognize. I need to understand what I can actually afford and achieve on my own before I can make honest commitments to anyone else.
The recognition that his romantic relationship deserved honesty about his financial capabilities showed emotional maturity that extended beyond family dynamics into personal integrity and relationship authenticity. Tyler was finally connecting his family behavior to its broader implications for how he approached adult responsibilities and partnerships. "I have one more requirement," I said, addressing the elephant in the room that hadn't been directly confronted despite hours of difficult conversation. "Thanksgiving dinner will take place at my home this year, with menus and arrangements that I design and coordinate. Everyone who participated in excluding me from this year's celebration will contribute by preparing specific dishes according to my specifications and serving other family members throughout the evening." The reversal was symbolic and practical, demonstrating that family hierarchies based on assumed authority could be restructured to reflect actual contributions and capabilities. The men who had decided I didn't deserve a place at their table would now serve dinner at mine, experiencing firsthand what it meant to support rather than dismiss family members whose efforts made celebrations possible. Dad smiled for the first time that evening, his expression showing genuine appreciation for the poetic justice of arrangements that would transform him from host to contributor in a celebration organized by the daughter whose business success had subsidized his restaurant for 8 years. "That seems completely appropriate, Camille. I think we all need to experience what it's like to contribute to celebrations rather than simply expecting to be served." The agreements reached that night created new family dynamics based on transparency, mutual respect, and recognition of everyone's actual contributions, rather than traditional hierarchies that had ignored the strategic thinking and financial resources that made comfortable lifestyles possible. Our Thanksgiving celebration, 2 weeks later, became the first family gathering where my professional achievements received the same recognition and appreciation that had always been extended to Dad's restaurant success. Nathan's toast during dinner acknowledged the business expertise that had supported our family's prosperity for 8 years, while apologizing for assumptions and behaviors that had taken that support for granted. Tyler presented a detailed plan for achieving financial independence while expressing gratitude for assistance he had never previously recognized. Dad's speech introduced me to extended family members as the successful entrepreneur whose strategic thinking and generous support had made everyone's comfortable lifestyle possible. The evening marked the beginning of family relationships built on truth rather than convenient illusions, where my contributions were valued rather than dismissed, and where decisions affecting the family were made through consultation rather than unilateral declarations delivered by people who had never bothered to understand the business infrastructure that supported their assumptions about their own independence and authority. 6 months later, Kellerman's kitchen continued operating successfully under market-rate lease terms, proving Dad's genuine business capabilities while operating on foundations of acknowledged rather than hidden family support. Nathan consulted me about financial decisions affecting his mortgage and career planning, treating my expertise as valuable family resource rather than irrelevant opinion. Tyler achieved the financial independence he had promised, building an adult life based on honest assessment of his capabilities, rather than mystery assistance he had never bothered to investigate. The family relationships we built after that November evening proved more satisfying and sustainable than anything we had shared during 8 years of interactions,
based on false assumptions about who contributed what to our collective prosperity and comfort. Sometimes the most important family conversations begin with someone finally saying what everyone already knows, but has been too comfortable or too proud to acknowledge directly. Next up, 2 more stories chosen just for you. If you enjoyed this, you'll want to see what's coming. Tap to keep going.